And councillors, we need to be out of chambers by 8. So about 5 to we'll be calling it quits. And that is providing we actually have people that are engaging with us, of course. Waru Fee Taihape last night, I think, set the records in terms of the number of people that were engaging with us. Some curly ones were fired around the room, most of them about re-litigation of decisions that have already been made. But it's good, and there were some rock solid questions. They were good questions.
And I think you had some great answers too, Andy. So yeah, it was really good. I thought it was a great.
Yeah.
I think we're ready for Andy's intro now.
Good to go, are we? Welcome to another session on the long-term plan. Welcome back to those that listened in last week. There will be a little bit of repetition, but tonight I want to really focus on rates specifically. Welcome to the new people that may be listening in. Thank you for engaging with us. It is important. The long-term plan is a very big deal. In past years, for those of you who have been through a long-term plan before, there is a long-term plan heavy document that comes out with the rates position and debt levels and all of the financials. We had hoped to have that out here now, ready, but there's been a bit of a delay, and I won't go into all the reasons for the delay, but you will get those documents and hopefully available on the 12th of April. There'll still be a long submission period. That won't be changed. Just the timeframes have been moved back a bit. So what is this thing, a long-term plan? Every council in the country needs to develop a 10-year look at itself. It looks at what money we're going to spend, what services we're going to provide, and essentially how much it's going to cost. That long-term plan gets refreshed every 3rd year. So year 1 is a long-term plan year, years 2 and 3 are annual plans, which are slightly different. And then you refresh. Council also looks strategically at 30 years out in terms of the services we're going to provide, especially in infrastructure. All of these things have to be balanced against what people can afford to pay as rates. So the consultation document, when it comes out, will set out all of those things and you can submit to it. And we'll take you through that process a little bit later about how you can submit. But essentially this year has been a difficult year in terms of raising rates or striking the rates for a long-term plan. And one of the difficulties has been, sorry, I was just looking, I've got a note coming up, I'm just having a quick look. Okay. So one of the difficulties this year has been, we've just had a revaluation of the district. This is where an independent group, via government, comes in and assesses the value of your individual properties. And for those that are landowners, they will have got a note in the paper, sorry, a note in the letterbox saying, this is the value of your property now. Most properties will have gone up in value. The difficulty is that some properties have gone up at a much faster rate than other properties. So we've seen a differential increase in rates. If everybody's rates increased at the same ratio, it makes very little difference to rates. But we're not seeing that. The big differences we've seen this year are urban rates in the southern area, and I'm talking Koitiata, Scottsbury, Martin and Bulls, have gone up at alarming rates. So if you had a property that was worth, say, $70,000 5 years ago, it could be worth well in excess of $300,000 now. In the northern areas, Taihape and Hunterville, etc., we're not seeing that speed of uptake. So this does create an issue, and I'll explain the repercussions and rates in a few minutes. From a rural perspective, sorry, I'm sort of jumbling my words a little bit tonight. From a rural perspective, the southern rates haven't increased at the same ratio. So property valuations there have been remarkably flat. If you had a property that was worth $2 million 5 or 10 years ago, it will have gone up in value, but nowhere near the same rate. However, northern farms have increased quite dramatically. Where does this play out in terms of rates? So the average rate increase right across the district is likely to be just under 7% at the moment. Later on, with submissions coming in, people requesting us to do more things, it could increase slightly, but it's going to be about that sort of rate, which compares favourably with our neighbouring districts. However, we're going to see wide variations. So whereas the average may be 7%, there'll be properties that face no rate increase at all. There'll be properties that face up to 20% increase on their rates. From an urban perspective, the lower value properties have increased at a higher rate than the higher priced properties. So if you had a property in Martin that was worth $250,000, it may have gone up quite substantially. But if you'd had a property worth $600,000 or $700,000, yes, it will have increased, but not at the same rate. So we'll see rate increases urban, probably in the areas of 10% or even 15% for urban properties. We will see in the rural sector, in the northern area, some properties will go up. Their rates will increase by up to 20%. And remember, that's starting from a very high base. However, rural south properties, as I said, haven't changed much. So some of those properties will face a no rate increase at all. And a few may even face a decrease in the rates. That's the challenge that we're facing this year. Council has tried looking very closely about how you can smooth out that effect. It is difficult. We rate on a capital value basis, so it's difficult to change that. And we realise even though your property has gone up by, it may have doubled or even trebled in value, that doesn't necessarily give you any more money to pay your rates or to go shopping or whatever. So it increases your net worth, but doesn't increase the amount of money in your pocket. There are several things that we have looked at doing, and one of them is in the area of differentials. And I'll just have a look at a note that's coming through at the moment. There's a comment from somebody saying, yes, values have gone up very substantially in Martin, and that's in that southern area. So that's essentially what I'm talking about. So how can we offset some of that? One is by way of differentials. So we have no difference in rating mechanisms between commercial, industrial, and urban. They're still rated at the same sorts of values. And one way is to say, well, we could increase the rate, the base rate, if you like, for commercial or industrial. So instead of it having a multiplier of 1, it moves to a multiplier of 1.2. In other words, they pay slightly more on their capital value. That is something that council will look at quite substantially. However, there's been a lot of talk also about whether properties that have significant forestry interests, whether they should face higher rates as well. That's probably a discussion that we're prepared to have in the coming year, but we're not in the position to be able to do it at the moment. And I might ask Dave, who's online, and I should introduce everybody that's online in a minute, but Dave is Head of Finance for Council. Do you have any comments around this effect?
No, thank you, Your Worship. Everything you said there is perfectly true. The recent valuations have come out in a very, very uneven outcome for the district. And if we don't do anything, the element of ratepayers' rates that is based on the value of their land will be significantly different and have really outcomes and consequences that would be seen as unequitable. It is worth pointing out that each ratepayer pays a number of different elements to their overall rates bill. Some are based on capital values and some are a flat fee. So just because your value of your property goes up by, say, 20% doesn't mean your overall rates bill will go up by 20%. It's just that element that is associated with the capital value. But if we don't introduce any of these changes the Mayor's talking about, there will be some rather inequitable outcomes for ratepayers, which is what we're working hard to avoid.
I apologise, I should have introduced the councillors online. So we have Councillor Tracy Hero from the Northern Ward. Tracy, do you want to introduce yourself? You'll have to unmute if you're going to do so.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, and so Tracy Hedor, first term councillor representing the Northern Ward, and it's been an amazing ride for the last 20 or so months. So, and I've been part over the last 2 weeks or so since we've started the LTP process, and it's been a really interesting and learning space for me to be in. So welcome all of those people that have taken time out of their busy lives tonight to come in and listen to tonight's LTP feedback. And
Councillor Warupanapa, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Andy. Yeah, kia ora koutou. Greetings to all. I echo Tracy's comments as well. I'm the first term councillor for the Southern Ward, and it's definitely been a huge learning curve to understand what goes on in the background in relation to how our district ticks. But it's an exciting ride, and you know, to be a part of a group of people who have a strong commitment to the well-being and progress of our community is a great honour. So greetings to all who are listening in.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Fee Dalgetty. And Fee, just to give you a little bit of a heads up, you're in the firing zone in terms of being a northern rural person, and I know that you're very aware of the rate increases that could happen within your neck of the woods. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Fee Dalgetty, another first term councillor representing the Central Ward. I farm with my husband on the outskirts of Hunterville, and yes, it's been a big learning curve in the last year and a bit. And I really thank anyone that is watching this and engaging in the LTP process, because without your feedback and comments, that's what makes all this happen. So we really rely on this consultation process.
Thank you, Fee. One of the questions I'm often asked is around why has my property gone up in value, and how does that happen? As I said, it's an independent process, and the assessors tour around and they look at what properties have been sold around you. So the increases in valuations are based on real sales that have happened in a similar area to a similar type of property. So totally independent to council. And there are a number of challenges to it. So people can go and say, no, I don't think my property has increased enough because I've added on bedrooms or whatever, and it can be adjusted on appeal. But very little challenge has happened within our district. And I think one of the reasons for that is when you get increases in property values, people tend to think immediately, well, this is really good, you know, I've realised my investment dream, and the rate considerations come at a later stage. In terms of rates and how can you submit to council around your individual rate position, and how do you know it? So when the document comes out, there'll be an idea in the consultation document. We'll show you rates on your area of the district and what they're likely to be. But there'll be a multiplier that you can go onto the council website, put in your valuation number, and it will spit out what your actual rates will be within the long-term plan. So then you know. And if you want to submit, and it may be about rates or any other thing, there's several ways that you can do it. So when the consultation document comes out, there'll be a page on the consultation document that literally you can tear out and you can submit. And it may be that you want new playgrounds, or you think the rates are too high, or you think other sections of the community should pay more rates and you should pay less rates. That opportunity is there. And I'd just like to make a few comments around how you submit. So you can submit on that form. You could submit as an individual. You could get a group of people together, and so long as you name who's in the group, you could submit as a group. You don't have to be a ratepayer to submit. Anybody can submit, irrespective of age and irrespective of whether they own a property. But there's some things that I would like to point out tonight around submissions to councils. First of all, we get a number of submissions around things that are not long-term plan issues. So if you have a pothole in your road or something that is a repair item, you don't need to submit to a long-term plan. You can go onto the council website and access the fix-it forms, which ask council to repair things. So submissions are more about finances of council and services that you want council to provide that they're either not providing now or that you think they shouldn't be providing in the future. But when you submit, clearly identify what you want and why. So sometimes we get people submitting and saying, the roads are not up to scratch. So it's useful, first of all, if we know which road you're talking about and why you think it's not up to scratch. For instance, if you think that it isn't being graded regularly as a metal road, then tell us. Include your contact details so that we can get back to you with a response. And we're required to do that by law. I've got a question coming in from Sally Patrick. Sorry, Sally, for naming you. Is the draft LTP out yet? Missed the beginning of the meeting and presumably you announced the date. We had hoped that the full draft document would be out at this stage, and that's why we've already been going through a lot of long-term plan meetings around the wider district. We've been held up with that process, and the reason for it is we cannot produce it in the public arena until it's been signed off by audit. And I know you're aware of those sorts of processes. So once it's been signed off by audit, council can approve it and then it goes out. So we're looking to have the consultation document out by about the 12th of April. It will just move the submission period on a little bit. It won't shorten it. You'll still have that opportunity. So the discussions in the long-term plan meetings at the moment have been general in nature, and we're able to give indications of the key choices within the documents rather than giving all of the financials and debt position of council. I have another question that's asking, can we talk about what rates go towards paying What am I getting for my rates, especially if I have to pay more? So why do rates tend to go up? So we've had an average increase, say, of 7%. First of all, there are things that, one of the big things is that we have to provide more in terms of government. So government comes out and says, you know, the level of funding that you need to put into consents, for instance, for wastewater plants or water and so on, you need to spend more money in that area. And we knew that. Often it's because we need to increase services. One of the things that's happening in our district at the moment is we're getting quite rapid increases in population growth, especially in the southern, the Martin and the Bulls areas, etc. So we have to plan for that. We're also governed by legislation in terms of earthquake-prone buildings. So we have about 7.5 years, for instance, to replace the building that we're in now or bring it up to earthquake status, which has to be in excess of 34% of a new build. We have put money into economic development because we wanted the people to come here, live here, work here, and pay rates. So we've increased that, and it's one of the key options for us to increase it again within this LTP. So our current budget within previous council or existing council now is $200,000 a year. So council is looking to increase that by another $170,000, which would put about, I think, Dave, it's about $22 or $20 on everybody's rates to be able to achieve that. I've got quite a lengthy question coming in, and I'll just have a read for a second. Thank you.
Andy, while you're reading that, would I be allowed to comment just on the last question as well?
Please do so.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I'm just trying to find it again about what do I get for my rates? I'm not going to the sender's name there, so I can't respond to the person directly. But what's going to be included in the draft long-term plan that the Mayor said will be coming out shortly? There's a really good summary of where the general rates and targeted rates get allocated to. Like we split down council activities between 23 key areas. For example, wastewater, stormwater, libraries, halls, swim centres, community housing, cemeteries, public toilets, forestry, solid waste, civil defence. And what the summary does is to show how each of them areas is funded, whether it be from general rate, by targeted rate, by user fees and charges, by subsidies and grants. So that gives you a great snapshot of how the rates are allocated at a high level between each of the areas, each of the key activities. Also in the revenue and finance policy, there's going to be more detail behind each of these things. Each key area produces what's called a funding impact statement that shows how many dollars are collected and allocated to that activity through the general rates and through rates for user fees and charges, and how much we spend on each of the areas. So you can see exactly at a high level in the first thing I spoke about, a snapshot of where the money is allocated, and then in more detail, how many dollars are actually spent in each area for each of the key activities. And if I could just continue with one other comment that the Mayor was talking about, when we talk about rates going up by, say, 7%, that's not each individual ratepayer going up by 7%. That means the total money we collect through rates goes up by 7%. So if, as an example, if we were to get 2% population growth, gets a bit complicated here, but if we get 2% population growth and we want our total rates to go up by 7%, that means existing ratepayers, on average, their rate increase won't be anywhere near 7%. It'll be around 4, 5, 5.5. So when we talk about rates going up, that's the total take. It's not each individual's contribution. So hopefully that makes sense. But if not, I'm happy to take another question on that.
Yeah, Dave, it illustrates, thank you very much, because it illustrates very much the need to grow our district. So for years we had a declining population, and therefore the needs to fund the district is spread by fewer and fewer people. So it illustrates quite clearly why we needed to grow the district and why we put money into economic development. There's a question that's come in around, will capital values continue to increase? Well, that's something that government is questioning very much at the moment. So government is looking at mechanisms that may slow the rate of property increases. They're looking at it more from a perspective, I think, of providing housing rather than a rating position for councils. So individual house prices changes, as I said, if everything happens at the same sort of rate, it doesn't affect rates to the same extent.
And again, Your Worship, may I jump in there a second?
Sure. Certainly.
So earlier on, the Mayor spoke about the different sectors we have and how different sectors have had higher increases in their capital value than others. There's actually one sector that's gone down, and the sector that I'm referring to, its average value per rateable unit is significantly higher than everybody else's. So when that goes down, that has a really bad negative impact on every other ratepayer. And there's a big question mark over whether that is equitable and fair, which leads us back to what we were talking about in one of the topics of this Zoom webinar.
Yeah, there's a few people asking questions about their individual rate positions, etc. We're more than happy to have an individual conversation offline around where they could sit in the future. So you just need to contact one of your councillors or contact myself and say, could you come and sit down with me and discuss this in more detail? And we're very happy to do that. There's quite a few things that, as I said, that we need to do around the infrastructure. And one of the conversations that's out there at the moment is around the three waters and provision of water, wastewater and stormwater, excuse me, across the district. And one of the conversations you will see in newspapers is around councils not having that role in the future. And people are then saying, well, if you're not providing that service, who does? And how will it affect my rates? We don't have all of the information on this at the moment, but it is likely that a number of councils throughout the country will form an aggregated model, and those services will be delivered by, say, a company in Wellington or Auckland or somewhere else, providing water or wastewater for a number of councils around the country. To do that, we would hand over our assets, so we wouldn't own the water plants, wastewater plants, etc. So how would they be funded if they're not funded as a council function by way of rates? Ultimately, you would get a bill the same way that power companies deliver bills. That's a question for us in the future, but when I'm talking in the rural areas at the moment, the number of farmers, for example, saying to me, well, we don't use those services and they won't be able to bill us in the future. So will our rates drop? Under the information that we've got at the moment, they probably would. But all of those costs for delivering those services need to be picked up by someone. And whether it's by council sending you a bill or another organisation sending you a bill, it would be just a different story. But it's a conversation that we need to have right across the district this year, because we have a year to make up our minds around that. I'd just like to welcome Councillor Jill Duncan to the airwaves. Would you like to introduce yourself, Councillor? You'll have to unmute yourself, please.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Tēnā koutou katoa. I just want to say it's a pleasure to be back online with you, and I hope this is entertaining and informative. I've just trying to get my head around this particular function, because normally you can press the space bar and it unmutes you, but then sometimes you have to find the button on your screen. So excuse my clumsiness. Yeah, so I'm a Northern Ward councillor, specifically with Tracy Hiroa. Good evening, Tracy, and Angus Gordon. But obviously we're all across the district, which is great, and lovely to see my colleagues Waru and Fee here tonight. And hi, Mr. Toombs, who is our amazing financial man. So good evening, everyone, again.
Thank you. It's really nice that we've got 4 new councillors on here tonight. So thank you very much and thank you for councillors for going outside of your ward on a number of occasions to talk to community groups. I think we have about 30 of these groups, 30 of these meetings around the district, talking about rates and talking about council functions, etc. One of the questions that's come in tonight, do the rural people pay rates, or is it just in towns? Well, yes, the rural people do pay rates. One of the biggest costs that council face are providing for our roads. So some people think that the government, through NZTA, as people refer to, provide for all of the roads of the district. No, they don't. The government pays for state highway roads, and they help councils subsidise internal roading costs. But that cost of roading is about 45% of our total budget. But not only do the rural people pay for roads or help pay for roads, but they also subsidise things like libraries, swimming pools. And sometimes they'll say to me, these are things that they don't use, but they recognise the public good component of having these services in town. Equally, the urban people might say, well, we support rural roads that we don't go on. But we tend to treat the district as a district. So we don't rate individually for town functions. So if we replace this building or do it up, or we build a new building as we're building on Memorial Park and Taihape, everybody pays. It's not just that community. When we built the new centre at Bulls, there were rural people right throughout the district, as well as the Bulls, Martin, Taihape towns paying for it. Some councils don't treat it that way, but we treat the district as an entirety. I see there's a note and a comment from someone that's saying, enough, please just state the facts. We're trying to state the facts as they come in, but until we have the full consultation document, which will be available on the 12th, we are required to be general in nature rather than being specific about everybody's individual rates. Once you have that document, you'll be able to speak more definitively around your individual rate positions. But thank you very much for being part of being on air. One of the questions has just come in about me talking about removing of the 3 waters from the long-term plan for this year. So as I said, council faces a decision this year about whether we give those services to another organisation to deliver. However, we have planned for very significant money in our long-term plan budgets for this year on the basis that we will continue to provide those services. So we've put into the budgets in excess of $10 million for improving water supplies and the strategic look around what water sources could be better in the future, etc. We've put equivalent amounts of money in provision of new wastewater plants. We have to do these functions. we can no longer continue to get consents to discharge wastewater treatment to waterways, for example. So one of the things that we will do is put a pipeline from Martin to Bulls and build a new wastewater plant in Bulls to satisfy both communities and try and gain some efficiencies. If another business in Wellington or somewhere else takes that function over from us, then the debt that we have in putting those facilities together will pass to the new organisation. But it is a conversation that we will hold right across the district on a number of occasions. Government will do a whole marketing campaign around these potential changes. Thank you. Councillors, is there anything else that you want to add to the conversation?
Yes, may I speak, Andy?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I just see another question from Candice Brooke. She's just wondering if they can subscribe somewhere to be alerted when this document's out. The answer's there, I think.
Look, as I said, we hope to get the document out on the 12th of April. We will advertise it widely throughout our websites, social media. We will have documents at the libraries, and we'll go to every group that we can think of to make the document available to you.
And I see there that Lisa said that she's actually going to put a link to the Facebook conversation to help out that. Yep, great.
Yeah, and I thank Lisa for helping make tonight possible, and also for Karen, PA, who's just hiding around the corner, for coming into work tonight. So staff have put an enormous amount of time into this sort of work.
Mm.
Andy, may I make another comment?
Sure.
Thank you. The topic of tonight's session is referred to rates differentials, and the Mayor mentioned earlier that we don't currently have them, and it might be a new concept to some, but it's worth noting that it's in New Zealand and Australia, for that matter, rates differentials are more the norm than the exception. It's actually unusual for a council like us not to actually have them. Now, I'm not saying that that's a reason for us to jump on and do them, but I just want the audience to know that these are actually a very, very common technique used in local government.
Yes, I agree. We are the exception, not having differentials. Council, a number of years ago, did have a roading differential between north and south. But it was something that Council opted out of several terms ago. But it is certainly something that is worth looking at. Councillors, we will look to cut this off reasonably soon, unless there are specific questions coming in. But before we wind up, individual councillors, do you wish to add to the conversation further?
Yeah, if I might just make a comment. One of the things that has been interesting for me during this period of time is the complexity that the council faces in trying to balance all of these different variables. And there are things that are constraints both from a central government, from Horizons and other arenas as well, that determine the scope by which the council can act. And at the end of the day, the best we can do is to act on the information that we've been given. And I've been extremely impressed by the diligence of the existing council, before we became councillors, and more so by the degree of commitment that the staff have had to help us to make wise decisions over this last year and a half.
Thank you, Warren. Fee.
Thank you, Andy. I would just like to really encourage everyone, when the information, after April 12, to use the avenue you mentioned earlier in terms of putting your valuation reference in and finding out what the direct impact will be on your property. And also I'd like you to consider, you know, what are the things that you want in your community, and you know, this is the time to basically put that through to council. If these things don't go into our long-term plan, it's very difficult to do it midstream. Thank you.
Yes, it's not only very difficult, but legally there are some things we cannot change. It has to be in the long-term plan consultation document if we're going to make substantial changes to the way that we rate properties. Yeah, absolutely right, Councillor. Anything from you, Councillor Duncan or Councillor Hira?
Well, I would just like to say that it's interesting for me, being a rural person up here in the north, where we've had significant rates rises. I understand that the Federated Farmers were invited to engage with the Rangitikei District Council and were unable to. I'm not quite sure how that worked, but with the consultation document not coming out until later on, and there are lots of meetings around the district, as Mayor Andy has said, so that people can engage with, but there is also another opportunity for farmers and everyone actually, but I'm just saying, as a farming group where I have a specific interest, just wanted to say that that could be requested, or any group can request of the mayor and councillors to have another actual meeting once the document comes out. So just to reiterate what Councillor Dalgety was saying, what Fee was saying about go online, look at what is specific to you, and if there are real concerns, get together, form your own group and request a meeting. That's more than possible, as Andy has said once again. So thank you.
Absolutely. We've probably had maybe a dozen or 15 community meetings at this stage, and the majority of those meetings they've said, look, could the councillors and the mayor come back in the future once the document is out? We're more than happy to do that. I think it is really important. Thank
Kia ora,
you.
Andy.
Thank you. Tracy, go ahead, please.
Kia ora. I just want to support everything from that's been spoken about by the three previous councillors. It is a complex, until you actually get into council, what I've found in this time, until you actually get into it, you don't realise how big and how wide and the complexities that's involved as a councillor, and you really don't realise the places and spaces that's involved in it. And so one of the questions that got asked tonight about where do your rates go to, the reality is it goes, your dollar is split up into so many places. It's actually quite mind-blowing when you're in it and see what where rates are put towards. I just want to tautoko and what Fee Dalgety has, Councillor Fee has said about having the opportunity to go online to check out those your QVs and seeing what difference that will make on your overall rates. And also, again, just reiterate to people, I'm sure we would all like to say we don't want to have rate rises in any way, shape or form. But the reality is, the reality of things is, in order for us to keep moving forward, that's what has to happen. So it's, if we are in a moving forward and a progressive type council, that's what comes with it. So if we want to try and encourage people, especially in the north, to have the opportunity to build, because housing is a huge issue up in this area. There's only limited areas of ways that as the council can obtain money, and rates is actually one of the biggest, is right there up the top of that. So yeah, kia kaha everybody. If you've got something you want to submit into the long-term plan, you know, get to it and make it happen. So kia ora.
Thank you, Tracy. One of the questions that's come in tonight that I haven't answered clearly was, the question is, the new builds that are going on in the district, how do they affect the rates of other people that are currently there? So essentially, council works out how much money it's required to provide services right across the district, and then divides it up literally by the number of ratepayers. So when you get new housing, and we've got between 500-700 new homes in the southern part of our district that are either being built currently or have just been built or are in some form of planning stage, essentially they help share the load. And when you have industry coming, especially if you have industry that has a very high capital value, that takes a lot of pressure off the existing rating base. If you go to a district like Kawerau, for example, that has a lot of industry, I think 3 companies pay more than a third of the entire rates bill for the district. So that is where growth is really important, and it takes that load off the existing ratepayers. So sorry that I didn't clearly answer that question earlier. I think we're about ready to wind it up. For those of you that may have questions still in the pipeline that you want to ask, please get in touch with us. We will run some more of these sessions, and hopefully more and more people will engage. Thank you, councillors, for being part of the session tonight. Thank you, Dave, for the amount of work that you do. I know that you spend countless hours preparing the long-term plan. I know it hasn't been an easy process for all of the staff involved in getting it out. The pressure will come off on the 12th for staff when we have a document out that we can be talking specifically to. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, fellow councillors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andy.